Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we're going to talk about Sheridan Cavitt. He was a counterintelligence special agent for the United States Army Air Force back in 1947 in Roswell. And he turned out to be the only witness that the Air Force could produce to try to refute all the other witnesses that were talking about crashed flying saucers and dead alien bodies. But unfortunately, it's very clear that Cavitt was not being totally truthful in his testimony. And also, he was very contradictory in his testimony that he provided the Air Force when you compare it to what he was telling Roswell investigators beforehand. Now, Cavitt, unfortunately, went to his grave in 1998 without ever spilling the beans on what he knew. And it's unfortunate because had he spilled the beans, then maybe that would have been one more nail in the coffin of the Air Force's dummy and balloon story. But anyway, I want to start with basically what happened here is this. Of course, the story is this. Basically, Jesse Marcel Sr., the top intelligence official in Roswell in 1947. Of course, in 1978, he finally went public with what really happened in 1947, and it had nothing to do with a weather balloon, according to Marcel. Marcel's basically, investigators had interviewed him on a number of occasions before he passed away in 1986. And the former intelligence officer said that whatever it was not of this earth. He never saw anything like it. I've played some little interview clips of him on the podcast before in the past. And he was a very believable person. And in fact, his son actually was a witness to some of this debris as well, Jesse Marcel Jr. I'll talk about him a little bit later. But today I want to really focus on Sheridan Cavitt, who actually accompanied Marcel out to the Foster Ranch where the ranch foreman, Mack Brazel, had discovered this field filled with this strange debris. So basically the timeline is this. On July 6th, 1947, Brazel came into the town of Roswell. It was 75, the ranch where he was working on was 75 miles northwest of Roswell's, but there was all this debris on the field, and he was trying to figure out, who's going to get rid of this for me. He doesn't even know where it came from. And so he drove into Roswell, and he went to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff told him, maybe you should contact the Roswell Army Air Base. So he contacted the Army Air Base, and apparently the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, sent off Jesse Marcel along with Sheridan Cavitt, who was the counterintelligence officer, to investigate. So they took all separate vehicles. Apparently, according to Marcel, he drove a staff vehicle. Cavitt followed him in a Jeep, and they both followed Brazel to this ranch. That, according to interviews with Marcel, there was no way that they would have ever found this ranch without following Brazel back at the time. They would have never known where it was. They would have known exactly where to look. So that's why they had to follow him back out there. So they went out there, 3 vehicles, a little parade, a little train of vehicles. So that's what happened. They went out there. It was on June 6th. It was getting late by the time they got there. It was getting dusk, so they decided to camp out in this little abandoned house there on the property. So and wait till the morning to investigate this debris field. So the morning of July 7th comes, and they get out and they start checking out this debris field. And according to Marcel, it was 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. And it was very strange material there, and he never saw anything like it before in his life. There were the I-beam fragments that had hieroglyphics written on them. There was metal that couldn't be bent or broken, very thin metal. There were other witnesses who later talked about the foil that when you crumble it up, it straightens right back out in your hand like a fluid, like mercury. But anyhow, when Roswell investigators started looking into this throughout the 1980s into the 90s, one of the people they identified as someone they should interview was Sheridan Cavitt. And Cavitt did tell them nothing. So basically said he wasn't even there in 1947 in Roswell. But then the Air Force, of course, was feeling the heat because you have all these stories coming out in the early 1990s. And plus you had the Congressman Schiff from New Mexico who was pushing for more disclosure about what really happened in Roswell. So the Air Force had to do something. So what did they do? They actually they turned to Colonel Richard Weaver, who was a disinformation specialist with the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations, and he proceeded then to put a report together. He started interviewing different people, trying to come up with an explanation that would put to rest this whole story of this UFO crash and alien bodies. And the result of that was this 1994 report, the Roswell report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. You could read it online. I'll leave a link for it. You'll find it on it's public domain. It was made for the public. And in there, you could read the different various statements that some of the witnesses interviewed gave to the Air Force, including Sheridan Cavitt. And I want to talk about what Sheridan Cavitt said in the statement, and then we'll get into what the problems with what he said. Okay, it says here, I, Sheridan Cavitt, hereby state that Richard Weaver was identified to me as a colonel, United States Air Force. I do hereby voluntarily and of my own free will make the following statement without having been subjected to any coercion, unlawful influence, or unlawful inducement. And he says here, I was a Counterintelligence Corps special agent for the United States Army Air Force who was initially assigned to Roswell Army Airfield following my graduation from CIC school in Fort Holabird, Maryland, in late June or early July 1947. Shortly after arriving at Roswell, New Mexico, in that time frame, I had occasion to accompany one of my subordinates, Master Sergeant Bill Rickett and Major Jesse Marcel, intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group, to a ranchland area outside of Roswell to help recover some material. Now, just so everyone knows here, Marcel and also UFO investigators contend that Rickett was not there. It was only Marcel, Sheridan, Cavitt, and Brazel. That's the only three people that went there. They followed them. The Sheridan, Cavitt, and Jesse Marcel followed Brazel, who was driving his beat-up pickup truck at the time. Anyway, continuing here, it says, I think that this request may have come directly from Major Marcel. I do not know who may have made the report to him. To the best of my knowledge, the three of us traveled to the aforementioned ranch. He's not saying Mack Brazel. He's saying Rick. It was Rickett. That according to Marcel, that's not true. Anyway, it says, to the best of my knowledge, the three of us traveled to the aforementioned ranchland area by ourselves. That is, no other persons, civilian or military, were with us. I believe we had a military jeep that Marcel checked out to make this trip. When we got to this location, we subsequently located some debris which appeared to me to resemble bamboo-type square sticks 1/4 to 1/2 inch square that were very light, as well as some sort of metallic reflecting material that was also very light. I also vaguely recall some sort of black box like a weather instrument. The area of this debris was very small, only about 20 feet square, and the material was spread on the ground, but there was no gouge or crater or other obvious sign of impact. Now, let me just stop there again. That contradicts what Marcel was saying. And plus, there was also a report of a gouge there, too, on top of it. Continuing, I remember recognizing this material as being consistent with a weather balloon. Now, that's a very important statement right there. He remembers recognizing this as a weather balloon right there on that day. That would have been July 7th, the day before the press release went out, stating that the United States Army Air Force had recovered a flying disc. Okay, that's a very important statement. Anyway, we gathered up some of this material, which would easily fit into one vehicle. There certainly wasn't a lot of this material, or enough to make up crates of it for multiple airplane flights. Okay, now that's contradictory to things that other people have stated. Of course, for one thing, Marcel actually sent Cavitt back ahead of him, told him to report to Blanchard, while Marcel stayed there picking up more of the stuff. And Marcel has been on camera stating it was so much of it, it was unbelievable. He said he never saw so much stuff. It was incredible. There was something that happened there, and it didn't have anything to do with a balloon. But yet this guy here is telling us that when he went there, he recognized it as a balloon right there on the spot. Well, if that's the case, why was there that press release the next day? It doesn't make any sense. Continuing here, it says, what Marcel did with this material at the time was unknown to me, although I know now from reading about this incident in numerous books that it was taken to 8th Air Force Headquarters in Fort Worth, where it was subsequently identified as a weather balloon, which I thought it was all along. I have reviewed the pictures in the 1991 book by Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt on the UFO crash at Roswell, wherein Marcel and Ramey are holding up this material, and it appears to be the same type of material that we picked up from the ranch land. I did not make a report of this incident to my headquarters since I felt that the recovery of a weather balloon was not a big deal that did not merit a written report. In the same referenced book by Randall and Schmidt, I was reputed to have told Rickett that we were never there and this incident never happened. The book seems to imply this was in some sort of conspiratorial tone. However, it is more likely I told him not to mention it to our headquarters because we had wasted our time recovering a balloon. I only went to this area once and recovered debris once, and to the best of my knowledge, there were no other efforts to go back there. If there were, they did not involve me. There was no secretive effort or heightened security regarding this incident or any unusual expenditure of manpower at the base to deal with it. In fact, I do not recall the incident being mentioned again as being any big deal, and I never even thought about it again until well after I retired from the military, when I began to be contacted by UFO researchers. Many of the things I have mentioned to these people have either been taken out of context, misrepresented, or just plain made up. I did know both Jesse Marcel and Bill Rickett very well. Both are now deceased. I considered them to be good men. However, both did tend to exaggerate things on occasion. Let's just stop there for a second. Okay, so now, at this point of his life, Cavitt could easily now say things like this because these guys are gone and they can't defend themselves anymore. Anyway, continuing. With regards to claims that we tested this material by hitting it with sledgehammers without damaging it, I do not recall any of us doing so. I also did not test this material for radioactivity with a Geiger counter or anything else. I do not recall attempting to burn any of this debris, but my wife tells me she recalled that Jesse Marcel, his wife, and son did have a small piece that they held over the fire when we had a cookout. In short, I did help recover some debris near Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of 1947. I thought at the time, and think so now, that this debris was from a crashed balloon. Anyway, let me just stop there. Balloons don't crash, by the way. I just want to point that out to the debunkers and the non-believers. That's no such thing. They come to the ground. They don't crash. I am not part of any conspiracy to withhold information from anyone, either the U.S. government or the American people. I have never been sworn to any form of secrecy by anyone concerning this matter, and I have received authorization from the Secretary of the Air Force to discuss with Colonel Reaver any information of a classified nature that I may have concerning it. There is no classified information that I am withholding. I have never been threatened by the United States government or any of its subdivisions or by any means not to talk about this incident with anyone, and in fact I have talked to a number of private researchers. My bottom line is that this whole incident was no big deal, and it certainly did not involve anything extraterrestrial. So that was a statement that Sheridan Cavitt gave to the Air Force when they were preparing that Roswell report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico desert back in 1994. It was published in 1994. The statement, the date that the statement was given was actually May 24th, 1994, and it says in Washington. But anyhow, that contradicts a lot of different things. For one thing, Walter Haut, like I've talked about many times before, we'll probably talk about it forever, right? Walter Haut, who was the information officer at Roswell, the one who sent out the press release that they had recovered a flying disc on the orders of Colonel Blanchard, said on the morning of July 8th, after they had collected this material, and they were also aware of the impact site where the craft came down, which was about 45 miles north of Roswell. At that point, they were aware of all of these things, and they were talking about it during a meeting in the morning. On Tuesday morning, and guess who was there? According to a sealed statement that Walter Haut signed before he died, that was released posthumously to the public. He actually stated, he says, on Tuesday morning, July 8th, I would attend the regularly scheduled staff meeting at 7:30 a.m. Besides Colonel Blanchard and Marcel, there was Captain Sheridan Cavitt, was among other people, was there, and they talked about what they were going to do about this. Obviously, according to all these other witnesses, including the late Marcel, according to Walter Haut, Cavitt was in on this, and he did know about it. And actually, I want to talk about something that researcher Kevin Randall talked about in his book, Crash, When UFOs Fall from the Sky. Of course, I'll leave links to all these things if you want to check them out for yourself. This is another excellent book. Kevin Randall, of course, he actually wrote two different books along with Donald Schmitt in the 1990s about Roswell, and then he talked about it in his own books later on, including this one here. And he talks about what happened here. He lays it out for us. He says here on page 74, it says, Marcel said that he had gone to the sheriff's office to talk to Brazel and then returned to the base. Brazel had some errands, and Marcel wanted to talk to his boss, Colonel William Blanchard, the commanding officer. Blanchard would tell Marcel to work with the Counterintelligence Corps officer, then Captain Sheridan Cavitt. In two cars, Marcel's convertible and an army carryall, they followed Brazel out to the ranch. According to Marcel, they stayed that evening in a small outbuilding, and the next morning were taken to the debris field. Cavitt would later deny to me that he had spent the night out on the ranch. He would deny that he went anywhere with Brazel. He would deny that he had ever participated in any type of balloon recovery. He would later reverse himself on all of that and more. Marcel would talk about the strange properties of the debris. According to him, there was a parchment-like substance that would not burn when he held his lighter to it. He talked of some metallic material that was very thin, but they couldn't dent with a sledgehammer. He was quite puzzled by what he was seeing and stumped about the origin of it. Marcel would later, in a recorded and videotape interview, say, "It came to Earth, but it was not something from Earth. I was amazed by what I saw." Cavitt, on the other hand, insisted to me originally that he had not been a participant in any such off-base activities. He told me that he had never bothered with a balloon recovery, and that he and Master Sergeant Louis Rickert, the non-commissioned officer in charge of their office, had been too busy with important work, security investigations and the like, to worry about weather balloons. In fact, according to Cavitt, he hadn't even been in Roswell when all these events took place in early July. He insisted that someone had gotten the dates of his arrival in Roswell wrong. But then his story began to evolve slowly, and he even showed me records documenting that he had just finished his counterintelligence training and had been assigned to Roswell in June 1947. Given travel time and leave, he said that he wasn't there until the middle of July, but that his wife had been there in early June to pick out an apartment and get ready to receive him. Eventually, he admitted that he had been there when Brazel went to the sheriff and Marcel went out to the debris field. Cavitt would tell Colonel Richard Weaver, who conducted an official investigation in the mid-90s, that he was the man who accompanied Marcel. And when the Air Force investigated the Roswell crash, Cavitt had a new story. Yes, he had gone out with Marcel and found a field filled with strange metallic debris, but he had recognized it immediately. There was no doubt in his mind that it was a weather balloon of some kind. And like what I'm saying, and then, of course, Randall asked this question. If he knew it was there, right, why didn't he say something? If he knew it was a balloon, why didn't he say something right then and there? It says here later on, Randall writes, standing on that sun-drenched field with the temperature in the high 90s, Cavitt didn't say a word about the identity of the debris to Marcel. He didn't say that he knew it was a balloon. Instead, he returned to the base and kept his mouth shut. Now, yeah, and it goes on like that. You can see where this is going. This is a great book, and he talks about a lot of different alleged crashes, UFO crashes. Kevin Randall, great researcher. Again, he's one of the people. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't know a lot of these things. Him, Donald Schmitt, Thomas Carey, Stanton Friedman, those among others, they do a great job. But you see, it doesn't make any sense. Now he says in his statement that when he went out there, it was a weather balloon. I knew it immediately. That was his sworn statement to the Air Force back in 1994. Sheridan Cavitt. If that's the case, why didn't he say anything? According to the sworn statement of Walter Haut, they actually had a meeting that morning, the regular staff meeting the next morning, July 8th, and they were all there talking about how they were going to handle this. Actually, Haut went on to say that they all knew that it was something strange, that it had to be something weird, that it was something from outer space, apparently, that it was something exotic, something that nobody ever saw before. Actually, Haut actually also went on to say that he actually saw some of the wreckage himself, that he saw the remnant of the crash. He saw the saucer itself that was stored temporarily at one point in a warehouse, and he also saw some of the bodies. Cavitt, though, he knew it was a balloon right when they went out there that day. But why? Okay, on July 7th, when he was examining that debris field along with Jesse Marcel, how come he didn't say something right then? Oh, this is just a weather balloon. Now, Jesse Marcel, again, there's another contradiction here. Jesse Marcel said it was a giant field, 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. And as research has shown, there's been other people that have stepped forward, different Army personnel, people that were stationed in Roswell at the time, who were ordered to go out there in groups and collect this stuff, pick all the materials up and put them in pouches and bring them back, and never talk about it. Don't say a word. So Cavitt was obviously doing the bidding of the Air Force. They went to him. They needed him to say something like this, and he did. Unfortunately for the Air Force, you could poke holes through this. Like I was talking recently, there's more holes in that Trinity UFO crash story than there is in a block of Swiss cheese. You could say that about Cavitt's story too. And also, I want to point out, here's from Roswell, the Ultimate Cold Case Closed by Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt. They talk about this too, about Cavitt. And they say his lasting legacy will be that he became the lone star witness of the Air Force Project Mogul report. Ironically, his testimony to us and to the Air Force is a huge contradiction of conflated confabulations. On one occasion, his wife apologized to us when he wasn't in the room. You have to understand, she said, my husband is sworn to secrecy and can't tell you anything. But that didn't stop us from trying. In fact, when Cavitt was terminally ill and given a very short time to live, we discussed a plan with his son Joe, an attorney, to get his father to write out a sealed statement that could be released posthumously. Frustrated, Joe informed us each time he broached the subject with his father, and the answer was always that he was not ready. And as Carey and Schmidt point out later, he was never ready because he ended up dying, and he never told the truth about what he really knew about Roswell. Obviously, he wasn't telling the truth. If he was, then there would have been no hullabaloo in the first place, right? I mean, if Cavitt's a counterintelligence agency, he's going to let all these things happen. He's not going to say to Jesse Marcel, "Oh, this is obviously a weather balloon," right? He's not going to say that when they're standing out there in the middle of the desert. "Oh, this is obviously a weather balloon," and it completely contradicts everything that Jesse Marcel's saying. Jesse Marcel said it was this big field, and he wasn't the only witness to that. There were, like I pointed out, if you do the research, you find out that there were other people out that were brought out later on to collect that debris, to clean it up, to rake it clear of anything. So there you go. I think what this is just one little anecdote, one little story of Roswell and how the Air Force's story just doesn't hold water. As time goes on, more people need to start looking at this and understand that what the Air Force has told us about these dummies and balloons is all nonsense. It's always been nonsense. There was something that happened out there. Jesse Marcel Sr. was not lying, but Sheridan Cavitt, I think he was being untruthful when he made this statement. He was doing what he was told to do, and they needed this, and that's what happened. So it's unfortunate. I mean, again, it doesn't make any sense. If he knew it was a balloon, then why the next day, the next early afternoon on July 8th, why was there a press release from the Army saying they recovered a flying disc? Why did that happen if it was just a balloon? Cavitt could have said something that moment. Marcel, they would have just stopped picking it all up. Oh, it's a balloon. Okay, you're right. Okay, let's go back. That didn't happen, though. Marcel stayed there because he wanted to collect more stuff. And the other thing, the other statement that he says in there, saying that wasn't that much stuff there. That's obviously what the Air Force wanted him to say back in the early 90s, and he said it. He initially told people, investigators, "Oh, I wasn't even there," but then finally he started admitting that he was there, but to the Air Force, but he had the Air Force story. He was towing the Air Force line. He was still part of a cover-up all those years later, and he took it to his grave, which is very unfortunate. Anyway, moving on, I want to talk about some other thing, another incident here, and this was with Jesse Marcel Jr. I think. I read this. I had this book ever since it was published. This was the Roswell Legacy, which he wrote about his experience with this whole thing. He actually got to handle some of the wreckage on the early morning hours of July 8th before his father would sit in that staff meeting with Sheridan Cavitt, among others, to talk about what the next steps are going to be. But anyhow, he actually had an experience in the early 1990s where he was invited to Washington. He got contacted from somebody in Washington who wanted to meet him in the Capitol to discuss the Roswell incident and what his remembrances were. And it was very strange to him. What happened was he actually had been invited. Now, before I go on, I just want to say Jesse Marcel Jr. has been dead since 2013. just recently I said, I don't know if it was in one of my podcasts or just yesterday I was on the Good Trouble show with Matt Ford. I might have said it there. But I made a misstatement saying that he died recently. He actually died in 2013. I just, what's happening here as you get older, it seems like time is just getting faster. It keeps moving faster as you get older. And it just seems like yesterday when he died, because I remember being shocked about it. I was like, wow. Because I actually did have an opportunity back in 1997 to talk to Jesse Marcel Jr. For the 50th anniversary of Roswell. I actually contacted him by telephone, and he actually called me back and said he was calling any reporter who wanted any quote from me about this, about the Roswell incident, because it is the 50th anniversary. And he called me back, and I had a little conversation with him, and I'm really glad I had that chance. But again, I just mentioned recently that he died recently. No, it's 11 years ago already. That's unbelievable. Time's flying, I'll tell you. It seems like when the older you get, the faster time seems to go, and it's almost like when you're born, you're dropped off a cliff, and as the closer you get to the end, the faster you're speeding up, and then finally, I guess you hit rock bottom, and it's all over. But anyway. In the Roswell legacy, he was talking about this incident. He had been Marcel Jr. had been contacted by somebody in Washington, wanted him to visit Washington for some sort of a UFO conference, and so he accepted the invitation. And then, not soon after, he received a phone call from somebody. He didn't know who it was. And this person wanted him to meet him at the Capitol building while he was staying in Washington. Somehow this person knew that that Marcel Jr. was going to be visiting Washington, and he wanted him to stop at the Capitol and meet him and talk about what his remembrances were. And he talked about that in his book here, The Roswell Legacy. And so he went to Marcel Jr. went to this. It was. He went to this conference, and then the next day he was supposed to meet with this person. He doesn't say what the person's name is here. He said he would never state that person's name, but he says, the next morning I went to the Capitol building to meet with the mysterious government official. I was greeted by security, which checked and found my name on the appointment list. I was shown to an office where I was left to sit in the outer lobby to await my meeting. As I sat there waiting, I remember feeling somewhat antsy because my flight back home was going to be leaving later that afternoon, and I didn't want to miss it. After a few minutes, the government official emerged from his office and approached me, smiling, and extended his hand. Nothing in particular about him stood out. He was the kind of person you would see on the street and never give another thought to, average height and weight and friendly. He did not, however, waste any time with small talk beyond a perfunctory, if seemingly warm, greeting. His demeanor stiffened a bit, and he actually kind of blurted out, I understand you saw at Roswell. I understand that you saw at Roswell. That's what he said. Could we talk about it? Do we need to go to a secure room? I was put at ease with his friendly informality as well as the implicit intrigue in his last question, but told him, no, I have nothing to say that I haven't said before. He responded that he might have things to tell me that would require a secure room and suggested that I follow him. We proceeded down a corridor that ended at an elevator that brought us deep underground. As we descended into the depths of the building, my wife's concerns came to the forefront of my mind, and I thought to myself that I might never see the light of day again. Yeah, before he left, his wife was concerned that maybe this was a way to rub him out, because they were concerned. There was concerns in the family at the time that maybe the government wants the Marcels to shut up about this already, and so she had those kind of concerns. So that actually crossed his mind as he was going down in this elevator underground in the Capitol. Anyway, it says here, when the doors opened, we emerged into what appeared to be a basement area with concrete walls, steam piping, and corridors branching off from the one in which we stood. The official led me down a passageway to a doorway that led to a fancy paneled meeting room, similar to the main conference room one would find in a large company, save for the fact that there were no windows, as this room was deep underground. Inside, the room was a long table with perhaps 30 chairs. On the walls above the tables were pictures of the country's founding fathers. The overall impression I got was that this was a room used for private meetings of powerful people. This room, obviously, let me just stop there for a second. This room sounds like a skiff to me. This is one of those secure meeting rooms where people in Congress have been meeting with whistleblowers recently. That's what this is. That's what this is. That's what it is. It's a skiff. Anyway, continuing here, it says, my host closed the door behind me and sat at the head of the table. In front of him was a yellow legal pad, and a copy of a book titled Majestic by Whitley Strieber, for which I had written the foreword. He pointed to the book and stated, "This is not fiction." Although the book is a fictionalized story of the Roswell incident, my host made it clear that he believed that the story of a UFO crash in Roswell was indeed a fact. He asked me to describe what I had seen in my family's kitchen that night so many years before. I closed my eyes for a moment, recalling that night as if it happened a few nights before, rather than the decades that had passed. As I began to tell my story, my mind was filled with the minutest of details, the sounds, the textures, the weight of the items I had held, and even the strange symbols that had adorned the pieces of I-beam. He asked me where I thought the debris might be now, and I responded, "Don't you know? You guys are the ones that have it." I commented that I had often wondered about the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that Barry Goldwater had mentioned in his writings, but had never been allowed to actually visit. My host answered that he did not know where the debris was. And then later on, he actually said that he was working for a Senate committee, actually looking into this, trying to find out where the what's going on with this cover-up. He says he told me that he had been charged with the responsibility of investigating the operation of a black government within the government, where funds were being spent without appropriate oversight to maintain a false story about the Roswell incident and cover the true story up. He said that his job was to report to the Senate Appropriations Committee and advise them as to where these tax dollars were going and why. So basically, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but I highly recommend this book. It has a lot of stuff in there like this that you probably never even heard of before. And that's why this is interesting, and I'm so glad that he did this. Actually, he co-wrote this with his wife, Linda Marcel. But I guess the fact is that there was an effort by somebody at that point in the early 1990s to find out what was going on here with this. Apparently somebody there knew that money was being spent on these programs, on these black programs to study UFOs, to reverse engineer them, and this guy wanted to meet with Marcel Jr. and he wanted him to tell him what he remembers about the debris, and he wanted to tell him that, "I think you're telling the truth, and yeah, there's something to this." So somebody in the government actually admitted to Marcel that, yeah, there's something to this Roswell case, and something crashed. He believes every word of it. And he's trying to dig deeper into it. Obviously, I don't know what happened with this, who this guy was, or whatever happened with his investigation. But we're still. I mean, that was in the early '90s. It doesn't say what exact year, but we're talking probably 30 years now. 30 years ago. We're still not there. We're getting there. We're trying to get there. But I really believe this. I can tell you this. Roswell to me is the key. I mean, if we could get that, if we could at least get them to admit that finally, just to come out with the truth on this, admit, yep, we were wrong. We were for covering this up as long as we did. This was started by people who are now dead a long time ago, and we got dragged into this, and this is the way the situation was for a long time. We felt we couldn't tell this story to the public because nobody's going to trust the government then. But I think at the same time, you got to come clean on this one. This story, the Roswell crash, is just too important to keep this cover up, to keep it covered up. The public needs to know about what happened here already. We need more details. We need to see the film footage that was taken at the crash site. That I'm certain that there is. I'm certain it exists someplace. We want to see the pictures. We want to see the reports. What kind of beings were these? What did they look like? We want to know it all. And I think that's where we should be. A lot of people in the UFO community should be focused on Roswell, because it's still hanging there. It's hanging over us like it's the 500-pound gorilla in the corner here. It's just something that we need to keep pushing for information for. And there's other things, other aspects I've been investigating with regard to Roswell that I'm going to be talking about in some upcoming episodes. There's so much to it that you just can't talk about it all in one sitting, and that's why I always recommend, like, people in the mainstream news and the legacy news, they need to read these books that people have put out. I'll leave links. I always leave links for Roswell books in the descriptions for all the podcasts. And people need to start checking these things out. People in the media need to educate themselves on this. People who are debunkers. I mean, you have to, it doesn't make any sense to me when when you look at all of this, all the information related to Roswell, and you have, for instance, you have basically, like, say you have like 500 people that were first-hand, second-hand, third-hand witnesses that were interviewed. Some of them provided affidavits. Some of them are they gave voice interviews. They're recorded. They're on tape. Like people like Kevin Randall, for instance, and Donald Schmidt and Thomas Carey. Some of they have things recorded. You know, there's a record of all this, right? There's evidence out there that shows this person handled this piece of material on this day. This person was sent out to guard the boxes that were contained the alien bodies on this evening. This person flew a plane from Roswell to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base carrying the bodies. You have all these different witnesses to this story, and when you put it all together, it paints a picture that's very clear to me. I mean, it seems like for certain that something crashed there, and it had nothing to do with balloons, and most certainly not anthropomorphic dummies. So I just wish that more people would start investigating this for themselves, read some of these books, and then weigh it against the reports from the Air Force, which are bogus. The Air Force is trying to cover this up, and this could only last for so long, right? I mean, when the Air Force started doing these reports, right, the 1994 one, and then the one I was just talking about, and then of course this one here, the 1997 one, the Roswell report, case closed, where they introduced the dummies theory, right? They didn't realize, I guess, or they didn't care that there were still researchers out there, interviewing people, digging into this. Like it went on for years after that. Now, at this point, I would have to believe that just about every single witness has passed away, and if not, they're close to it. But there is enough data out there now that shows that this story from the Air Force is bogus. And if you do your research and you educate yourself on it, you're going to know that it's bogus. I mean, the Air Force has no witnesses except this guy, this one. I don't even know how you could count him as a witness based on the contradictory statements he makes. And then the fact that he makes a statement, Sheridan Cavitt made the statement, oh, I knew it was a weather balloon right the second we got there. Well, if that's the case, then none of this would have happened, right? I mean, he would have went back and told the Colonel Blanchard, yeah, it was a weather balloon. Or he would at least mention it during the staff meeting the next morning, right? But he never did. And then when researchers went to him, he lied to them. He lied to them again, and he lied to them again. Then he told the Air Force this story. How could you believe any of it? None of it. This story that he told the Air Force, I don't believe is true at all. And in fact, even his family, members of his family, his wife and his son felt like he wasn't telling the truth. So how could you even count him as a witness? So again, people need to start educating themselves on this. Roswell is the key as far as I'm concerned. It really is. And there's other aspects of this, of the Roswell case that need to be focused on. And I do plan on doing that in some other upcoming episodes. But anyway, let me see. There's one more thing I think I wanted to talk about. Yes. I received a comment on Spotify from a Charlie Walker Jr. He says, and this was, he was commenting on the episode, UFO debunkers and their flock are in a cult and don't know it. And he wrote, I know, he used one of my quotes against me. He says, I know I am right and that they are wrong. And then he goes on to say, not an open-minded position from someone claiming it is others that are not open-minded. Testimonial evidence may be evidence, but it's not good evidence. Okay. Let me just stop there. Sorry, Charlie, but personal experience, I believe, is it's the only form of gaining absolute knowledge on something. When you have a personal experience with something that I have absolute knowledge. I have absolute. There's no question about it. It's absolute knowledge about this reality because I saw I encountered one of these beings with my own eyes. I saw one of these craft up close with my own eyes. So I have the absolute knowledge, and then on top of it, I've done my research, so I know I'm very comfortable with making these statements. I know that I'm right, and that's the way it is. I mean, I've always stated. with regard to, I believe it's extraterrestrial. It could turn out that I'm wrong on that. Some people say it could be ultra terrestrial if they're already here. Some people say they could be interdimensional, coming from another dimension. Right? Whatever the case, right? But the bottom line is there's some sort of a non-human intelligence that has technology that exceeds anything that we have, and that's just the bottom line. So. Yeah, I'm open-minded. I am skeptical too, as I point out many times. There are things I don't believe sometimes. I mean, I need more evidence, right? So yeah, I am very open-minded. But I mean, how can I listen to a debunker who I know is giving out false information? I mean, no, I know I'm right and I know that they're wrong. I am open-minded at the same time because I mean, you can't get any better than personal experiences, right? That provides you the absolute end-all answer, the absolute end-all knowledge. So, sorry. But I wanted to point that out there. Because, people, I get a lot of comments. It's actually since yesterday, since I was actually on the Good Trouble show with Matt Ford, and I got a couple of trolls sending me stuff. What are you going to do? I don't care. You get it, you look at it, you laugh about it, and you move on. And that's all you can do. And then you get comments like this from people who are having trouble with this. I think what we're going to have to do at some point, we need a deprogramming project or something. Or maybe people in the UFO community could come up with some sort of way to try to deprogram these people who are having trouble accepting the evidence. And they look at evidence, they don't know that they're looking at evidence. I mean, physical trace evidence, implants, photos, film, witness testimony, tens of thousands of different people. I mean, for some reason they're having trouble with this. They believe, though, that there's life on other worlds. You'll hear them, oh yeah, Carl Sagan said it's okay to talk about that. Yeah, I believe in it. Look at all the billions of planets. Well, if there's billions of planets out there, and some of them are older than Earth, like you hear some astronomers saying, yeah, there's planets out there that are a billion years, that they've been around a billion years longer than Earth, and they could harbor life. They're in a position where they could potentially be harboring life. So if that's the case, that means there could be civilizations out there that had a big head start against the human race. You got to use common sense here. You got to start using common sense. I mean, but there may be a deprogramming program to try to get more people behind the UFO community rather than fighting against it, and then maybe if we have more people asking the government questions and demanding the answers that they're seeking, then maybe we'll finally get somewhere. The more people that are behind the effort to push for disclosure, the better. And maybe we need to start by deprogramming some of these people that have been brainwashed by the debunker cult, okay? Or are part of the debunker cult, brainwashed by the debunkers. Maybe that's where we need to start. Anyway, I want to say thank you all for joining me. Until next time.